Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hi, Jack. I just wanted to take a moment just to let everybody know that we did have some requests to have the session recorded. So you're welcome to leave your cameras off and just be aware that it will be recorded. And also just a friendly reminder, if you can just make sure that your microphone is muted during the session, that'll just avoid any kind of playback coming from things going on in your home. So we would really appreciate that as well. So I'm just going to share my screen here very quickly. We'll just test this out. There we go. Hopefully everybody is able to see that. Excellent. Jack,
Yes.
you can
Yes.
see? Perfect.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to give just a warm welcome to all of our guests today. We're so pleased to have you here with us in this virtual space. For those of you who have supported SAS Polytech student practicums, it's because of your support that our students are able to build confidence, develop meaningful skills, and experience real success in their learning journeys. For those of you who are joining as interested guests, we're very happy to have you here with us today too. We truly appreciate your willingness to learn and your commitment to making a meaningful difference in somebody's life. We hope you enjoyed today's session. This professional development will be focused on autism spectrum disorder and understanding and supporting behaviors. We look forward to learning together, sharing ideas, and continuing to strengthen our understanding in ways that support all learners. I'd also like to acknowledge that Saskatchewan Polytechnic campuses are situated on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories and the homelands of the Métis. We would like to acknowledge that although we are gathering virtually, we are all living, working, and learning on the traditional lands of the Indigenous peoples here in Canada. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we recognize the importance of ongoing learning, reflection, and meaningful action. So thank you all for joining, and I'm going to hand things over to Jeff.
Awesome. So hi everybody. It is really nice to meet you all. Thank you for coming. I appreciate that. For many of you who've been working with kids, especially during the day, I appreciate that you are coming after work hours. So thank you so much. I'm just going to very quickly share my screen with you. So if you can, in a second, just let me know you can see my screen okay. That would be awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Um, Before I start into my session as well, just a few kind of, I guess, housekeeping things. Um, I appreciate the session is about supporting autistic children. So, as I would with any of my students I'm working with, if you need a break, if you need to use fidgets, if you need to stand up, of course I can't see you all, but just know that that's okay. Do what you need to do to get through the session as well. I think when we think about how we're supporting our own students, that goes to you as well as participants as well. So you may not be able to tell, but I'm on a standing desk right now, and that helps me regulate. I also have fidgets, which I kind of use often, not even intentionally, but it really does help in my own learning. So please do what you need to do as well. Okay, so before we start, I just kind of want to ask everybody how our energy levels are. So this is from Autism Level Up, and that's a really good kind of organization that provides different visuals and supports for autistic people. So if you can just let me know, the idea is kind of the energy where we are and what we need for the activity. So if you can just let me know whether you are kind of at the bottom, you're falling asleep, if you're focused, if you're kind of hyper over the top, just let me know. That would be awesome. I can see some focused, which is good. I can see some chill, awesome. Focused, calm, awesome. Focused, calm. Awesome. I love it. What I really like, I can see somebody's tired as well. That is completely okay. I can see a few of us are tired. I can see Sarah is chill. Awesome. The reason why I always do this at the start of my sessions, and I do this with my students as well as when I'm teaching for SAS Poly, is to get a bit of an idea of where we are energy level. But Also to know that it's okay to have different energy levels. So it's okay for that to fluctuate. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to be focused. It's okay to be jumpy. And that is very much the same for the kids we're working with as well. So I hope that we have that grace when working with children as well. And again, that's fluctuating too. If I'm speaking at any point, and I always say this to my students, if I happen to be sending you to sleep, tell me in the chat, and I promise I will not be offended in any way, because it is really important, right, to make sure that the energy level matches where you need to be as well. And my job as kind of an educator, and especially when it comes to working with autistic people, is to adapt how I'm teaching to support the students that I'm working with as well. So just a bit about our agenda tonight. You may kind of see that I've used visuals. That is very intentional because we know that visuals really help our students learn in a more meaningful way. So, and just a little bit about what is autism, behavior, anxiety, transitions, some pieces around sensory supports, visuals, which again you can see on the screen right now, behavior, and just some questions as well. If you have questions, please feel free just to jump in the chat at any point as well. I will try and answer as many as I can. So just a little bit about me. So my name is Jack Gilbert. So I'm an instructor on the autism program at SAS Polytech. I've been teaching for SAS Poly since 2022. As well as that, I work in the K to 12 stream during the day as a student services teacher. So what I hope comes across is that a lot of the work I do is working directly with students as well, which is such a joy to do. In terms of my education background, I'm a teacher. I have a master's and I'm doing my doctorate in autism with educational leadership. And my background initially, how I fell into working with children with autism, I actually worked as an EA in a school in Milton Keynes, which is where I'm from in the UK. And then I taught in a school for London, which was specifically focusing on autistic children. One of the best jobs I've ever done. And I've also worked as a senior support worker for an organisation called Autism East Midlands in the UK as well. One thing I will say is, even though I've worked with many autistic children, we're always learning all the time. We're always going to meet new kids, and every child is so uniquely different. So I really hope that comes across throughout the presentation as well. So we're going to start with just a kind of a quick video just about what is autism. And it's just a very kind of brief introduction, just so we can start to understand autism. I appreciate that we likely have different experiences in the room, and that is completely okay as well. So just a very quick introduction. If you can just let me know that you can hear the video, that would just be awesome.
It's really important for all educators to understand autism and how having an autism diagnosis can impact upon a child's access to high quality early learning and care. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental condition that has long-reaching impacts across many different areas of a person's life. The areas impacted include communication, social interaction, and behaviour. People with autism typically present with restricted interests and repetitive patterns of behaviour. Autism is also frequently associated with sensory differences and difficulties in processing sensory information. These differences will impact the way children think, the way they perceive the world, and how they process information. In early learning settings, these differences might look like difficulties related to transitioning between activities and different areas in the centre, engaging in functional play with the toys and resources, making and maintaining friendships with their peers, communicating their wants and needs to others, understanding what's being said to them, and regulating their emotions and behaviour. As educators, it's our role and privilege to discover the specific challenges and strengths that each child has. We then need to use this knowledge of the child as the basis of our program to create inclusion in our early childhood settings. Although all people with autism may face challenges in the same key areas, all people with autism are unique. They experience these challenges differently. So, to successfully support a child with autism, it's really essential that we understand the characteristics of autism, but what's going on for that child in particular.
Awesome. Okay, so when we are thinking about autism, this I will say this is coming from a very much a medical perspective of autism, so just bear that in mind as I'm going through this. But in terms of the diagnostic criteria of autism, it comes under two areas in terms of DSM-5, and what that is challenges with social communication and interaction. And the other one is restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. So when we look at that in relation to the DSM-5, what that means is, so number one, again, is deficits in social communication and social interaction within multiple contexts. Now, personally, I hate the word deficits because that comes across in such a negative way. But this is just how it's assessed in terms of the criteria. But that might mean difficulties with social emotional possibly so the back and forth kind of communication, non-verbal, so non-speaking community behaviors, and developing, understanding, maintaining relationships as well. So often when you're supporting autistic people, these are just some of the characteristics that you may see with autistic people as well. Another piece in terms of diagnostic criteria is that restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. So, examples, this could be things like repetitive motor movements. So that might be things like lining up, so echolalia. So, for example, you might have children who may make specific noises, or they may kind of repeat the same thing again and again. That kind of insistence on sameness. So that would be things like that kind of need for routine, structure, and predictability, and that challenge to very small changes. So if I can give you an example, today I was supporting my own students. And we had something different in our schedule, and one of my students still wanted to follow the schedule that we would normally do. And that was because, again, that was his routine. That's what we do every day. And that change is something that that child found particularly distressing. And again, that is okay when we think about programming. That's a really good thing for us to consider when we're thinking about supporting our kids as well. Again, that fixated interest. And I hate that word fixated interest because it kind of comes across as a negative way. So I try and use words more like enthusiasms, right? So you might meet students who have really specific interests. So for example, I've had children who I worked with who have interests in things like trains or radio transmitters or Spider-Man, Harry Potter. Again, it's going to be very different for every child, but not every child has a really particular interest. Um, as well. And also just that hypersensitive to input. So I'm sure many of you have worked with children who may be particularly sensitive to different areas. That could be, for example, whether it's too bright, whether, for example, a child is more sensitive to touch. So again, sensory needs are really important. And when we think about supporting our kids, really considering that helps us provide good programming for our kids as well. Because again, if our children's sensory needs are not being met, it's going to be really hard to support them in a meaningful and purposeful way. So one thing I just want to kind of go over to is autism spectrum disorder. Something we previously thought is that it was much more linear, but we now know that actually that is not the case. Um, it's not linear, so things like more autistic, less autistic, those are terms that are quite outdated. But actually, autism more looks like differences around, for example, social differences, interests. Oh, let me just go back sensory sensitivities, emotional regulation, perception, executive functioning, so our organization skills, and others. So it can mean so many different things. It really is a spectrum. And that is also the amazing thing about autism because certainly in my case, I've never worked with a child who is the same. Everybody is so different. So even, for example, we might have different strategies and tools. We're still going to meet children who we meet for the first time, who are going to make us think very differently, and that is okay, and that's the joy of the work that we do. So again, terms like high functioning or low functioning can be harmful and outdated. And for example, even whether Asperger's, um, which was once in the diagnostic criteria, is no longer in the diagnostic criteria. When I'm saying things like Asperger's, for example, you may work with autistic people who still use that term. Again, it's about respect when it comes to language, and really listening to what that person is telling us. I think that's really important as well. So this goes on to a quote, a very famous quote by Dr. Stephen Shaw, and it means if you've met one person with autism, you met one person with autism. And I think that is so important to remember. Again, every single child we work with will have different needs, they have different strengths, they have different challenges, and different ways to work with them and connect with them as well. The key I will always say is building that connection and positive relationship, which I appreciate in practice might take time and may take a long time to really build that trust. But as people, we want to be predictable for our kids, and we also want to make sure we're implementing strategies so our kids can be their true self and thrive as well. For many of our kids, even them, for example, being in daycare, we're already forcing many social expectations on our children, which they can often find difficult. Or, for example, if we might have kind of a cluttered environment and so many things going on, that can be really difficult for our kids. And again, that's okay, but that's how can we support, how can we change what we're doing as well. So, I don't think we're gonna watch that video, but it's just a quote by Temple Grandin, and if you know who Temple Grandin is, she is a very very well known autistic person who also is a researcher as well, and has wrote many books on autism and other things as well. But behavior never occurs in a vacuum. It's the end result of the interaction between the child and his or her environment, and that environment includes the people in it. So we as people are part of that environment as well. And how we support our kids, we have to be very mindful of that as well. Um, Again, the more we do, oh, I'm just realized I may have skipped a slide. But there's two really important factors to remember. So number one is that behavior does not happen in isolation. So when we think about behavior, there are often little things that could result in a child behaving in a specific way. Also, for example, all behavior is communication. So one thing we want to be really thinking about is what is that child trying to communicate to us? So I can give you an example today. I was with my students. We were trying to transition from my classroom to the kitchen. As soon as we went to transition, one of my students dropped straight to the floor. Now, that was the child's way of telling us they don't want to go to the kitchen, they want to stay in the room. Now, I could have had two responses to that. I could have firstly forced them to comply, or I could have listened and encouraged that child to communicate that, which is what we did. If all I then did was trying to get that child to comply, all I'm doing is I'm making it difficult for myself, but most importantly, I'm going to make it more difficult for that child, and I'm going to destroy that trust I've built with that child as well. So it's really viewing behavior as communication. What is that child trying to tell us? And again, the more we can support our kids so they're able to communicate and communicate when in whatever way is most meaningful for that child. That could be pointing, that could be using AAC device, it could be using visuals, it could be using words, it could be writing. However that child is able to communicate. But the more we can communicate, the more we can support our kids so they can communicate, and the more successful and the more regulated they're going to be as well. And what I will say is that's our job to support that as well. We can't just expect the child to be able to communicate with us. We have to also teach them the skills to do that as well. And that will take time, and that's okay. So when we're thinking about behavior, we really want to kind of dig a little bit deeper and ask what is motivating behaviors? So what do we think that child is trying to achieve by engaging in a specific behavior? Again, there's always a reason, and we're not going to know those answers straight away necessarily. So this is where we might have to do a little bit of tracking, we might have to have some consultations, we might have to talk to other people. Again, And one thing I would say is parents are such important people in this, and often we want to walk alongside our parents, but very often our parents and families have the best understanding of their child. Sometimes they might not know, and that's okay. You can brainstorm together, but really thinking about what the motivation is. So, for example, does a child want a specific thing or a certain item? Is it a sensory need? Is it a medical factor? Really think about that why. Again, what are the patterns? So, for example, is a child struggling at a particular time of day? Is it a particular transition? Is it all transitions? What are some of those patterns and trends that we're seeing? And the reason why that's important to know is because if we can figure out those things, then we can proactively go in and try and support that child in a more meaningful way. And again, why is a child engaging in physical behavior? What purpose does it serve? So, for example, if a child is wanting a snack, for example, and they're running into the cupboard to get a snack, well, that's their way of the purpose is because they're hungry, right? So again, how can we communicate so the child is able to do that in a more meaningful way, right? And then lastly, a question that we have to ask ourselves, and this is me too within this, I've done this many times, but not intentional, but um, are we unintentionally causing child to become dysregulated? And this is where we have to take that step back as educators and really think, okay, what are we doing? Is there something we're doing that could be maybe triggering behavior? And if so, that's okay, we're people, but how can we change that? And this is where, as practitioners, I hope and believe we all do, we reflect all the time on what we're doing. So, for example, I've had situations where I've certainly come out and think, okay, I'm going to do that a little bit differently. I can give you one example where, knowing that we're going into the World Cup, in the last World Cup, I was still teaching back in England that time, and England made it to like second in the final. And I sang a song in my class called "It's Coming Home." I asked all my kids if they wanted to sing it. Most of them said yes. We sung it, and for one of my students, it was so overwhelming to the point that they ran out of the classroom because it was too much for their sound. Now, in hindsight, on reflection, I could have prepared that child a little bit more. We had headphones available, but they wasn't easy accessible in that moment to put them on for the child. So, in reflection, again, I could do something different there to support that child for future reference as well. So we're gonna watch just a couple of minutes video by Dr. Barry Pazant. So that Barry Pazant, he is the author of Uniquely Human, a really good book if anyone wants to learn more about autism. I know he also has a podcast as well. But this particular video just looks at the idea of autistic behaviors are human behaviors. And I really just like the way he looks at it because again, for example, when we get excited, we will jump up and clap, or right, and pieces like that are just so key for us to consider because often they're things we do, but I certainly see times when we may have tried to, or where people have tried to stop an autistic child from engaging in those behaviors, but they're behaviors we do as well. So I think that's just something to consider.
A lot of what I was seeing in children with autism and their families, it was very, very different from what the literature was saying. At that time, words that we used very often were the behavior of kids with autism or people with autism was bizarre, was deviant, was psychotic, that their speech was meaningless parroting. And what I saw were behaviors that certainly were different, but that could be seen as human behaviors. In Uniquely Human, I give many examples of how what we have tried to put in a box and say, oh, that's an autistic behavior, is a human behavior. So one example of that is jumping up and down and flapping. It's not uncommon, especially for a child with autism when they're very, very excited, to jump up and down and flap their hands. But the rest of us, those of us who are neurotypical and not on the autism spectrum, may jump up and down and flap when we're very excited, as when a touchdown is scored by our favorite football team, or as Roz Blackburn says, watching somebody win a game show on TV or winning the lottery. There's a lot of autistic behavior going on there. That's very excited behavior, but we don't label that as autistic behavior. We label that excitement. So why can't we look at so many of the behaviors of people with autism and, in a sense, normalize them because we see them in all of us? Rather than looking at autism as a disability, or as some people say, a disease, which is actually inaccurate, that's in a child or in a person. That autism really is, in everyday life, a shared human experience. When we're with a person with autism, it obligates us to act differently. And when we act differently, it supports them. I've known many parents who've said that by having a child with autism, they become a more open-minded, more tolerant person, that they seek out ways to help other people because they've benefited so much from receiving help from others. So if we understand autism as a shared human experience, not just an issue in a person that needs to be fixed, that opens up all kinds of possibilities for us to be a more compassionate society, for us to be more helpful towards each other, and for us to understand that continuum of humanity in all of us.
Okay, so a video from Dr. Barry on there. Super, thank you for your comment. I love that approach. I completely agree. It's so important when we think about supporting autistic people, right? We want them to be their true self, right? I really do believe that is so important. Our job is not to change the child, it's to respect the child and to allow the child to be their true self, right, as well. So thinking about behavior as communication, there are often different reasons for that behavior, and here are just some of the examples. What I will say is more recent research is actually telling us is much more complex than what I'm telling you today. But for the kind of the nature of this presentation, we're going to look at just some of the reasons. So as educators, we need to be detectives to really try and figure out that why piece too, right? Often, a good way to think about this is just thinking about the word meets, and here are just some of the reasons that a child may be engaging in a specific behavior. So the first thing we always need to consider is medical, and that is so key. If a child can't tell us that they're in pain, they are naturally going to be dysregulated. I would be as well if I was in pain and I couldn't communicate how I was. But even if I can communicate, I'm still going to be very dysregulated. So really thinking about that too. And again, that could be their way of demonstrating that, right? If the child has a headache or a stomach ache, um, it's important to explore this first before we look at other reasons as well. Secondly is escape. And escape is really a really important one too. A child may be appearing to act out, and I quote that as I say that, but because they're trying to avoid a situation that they find really distressing. So for example, that could be throwing work on the floor because work is too hard. It could be throwing themselves on the floor. It could be running out of the room because the noise level is too high. It could be something like a smell. So I had a student who I worked with last year, and they would tell me that they could hear this buzzing sound in my room. And I could not hear it, but the child told me they could hear it so clearly. The only way I was able to hear that sound and the child directed me to where the sound was coming from was by putting my ear right up at the wall, and I could hear it was like a buzzing sound through the wall. Um, that child, that's all they could hear when they was in my room. So my sensory perceptions naturally filtered that out. But for that child, that was something that they were unable to do. Now that child was able to communicate that to me, so we was able to move to a different space. But if they're not able to communicate that, that can be really difficult for them. So again, we want to really think about why a child might be escaping from a particular situation. Often there's a reason. Is it the environment is too overwhelming? Is it something else too? So I'm just gonna really quickly just stop sharing my screen for a second, just because I just noticed I have my Outlook is bouncing up and down. So I'm just gonna go back into my screen. Awesome. I apologize for that. Um, So the other piece is attention as well. So again, maybe it's to get attention from an adult or a peer. If a child is seeking attention, that is okay. Something we can think about is how we're supporting that child so they're able to still get that attention in maybe a more positive way too, right? I know we've had kids who may want attention, whether it's positive or negative. Something I always try and do is again spend that quality time with the kids we're working with as well, right? Sometimes I will say is we often assume it's attention and it isn't. So that's one thing we don't want to quickly just assume that a child is doing something for attention because again there could be multiple other factors as well before we know that's why. Another thing is tangible. So for example, is there something in particular item they want? Is it, for example, a pen, which I may have? Is it a fidget? I can give you one example where a child I was working with, they were screaming in the class, and this is when I was teaching a grade one class in the UK, in a school for autistic kids, and the child was screaming. I was really trying to figure out what it was, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And then eventually, actually, somebody else came in and they said, I think they're looking at the cupboard. I think they want something in the cupboard. So I was like, oh, okay, didn't think about that. Got the keys, went in the cupboard, and actually what they wanted was a tray of Legos. So what we was able to do, we was able to print out a symbol saying letters, and then we could then support that child so we're able to communicate that as well. So if, for example, it is something tangible, we want to really think about how we're responding to that, how we're supporting that child so they're able to communicate that as well. So that's where sometimes as a teacher, I might, for example, the first few times, I just want to see, okay, where's that child going to? What are they trying to get? I can see they're going in my cupboard, but like I wonder why. What are they trying to get in there? Is it something interesting? And if so, how can I respond to that too, right, as well? A really good way to do that too, if it's tangible, is label things in your classroom so that if a child can see where something is. So in my case, I have pictures and symbols in my classroom. So I'll ask the child generally to go and point to show me something what they need as well. Or it could be, for example, taking your hand to somewhere too. Um, and lastly, sensory. And sensory is so important. Sometimes what we see is disruptive behavior, and it's often because a child's sensory needs are not being met. So some examples that could be, for example, it's too bright. It could be it's too noisy in the classroom. It could be there's too much clutter. There are so many different ways we can support that as well. So for example, in my classroom at school, my lights are often off. I've actually had it where I've tried to kind of open the door, like kind of open the blinds a little bit, and one of my students will go in straight away and be like, Mr. Jack, close blinds. I'm like, oh, okay, sure, thank you for telling me. Because it's too bright for that child. So again, if I responded differently to that, then what will happen is that child is most likely going to escalate and we're going to see more of those behaviors. So again, that goes back to listening to the needs of the kids that we are working with as well. And again, you might see specific things like children who are pacing or stimming. Again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the presentation, but stimming is completely okay. It's a self-stimulatory behavior. So that's something we want to really consider. Again, what is that child communicating to us? Is it a happy stim? Is that child overwhelmed? Are they dysregulated? Are they communicating to us that it's too much, right? But often it's that way of a child communicating to us as well. So it's I just want to show just another quote from Dr. Barry Buzon. So it says it's not helpful to dismiss what children do as autistic behavior or apparent behavior or non-compliant behavior. Instead of dismissing it, it's better to ask what's motivating it, what purpose does it serve? And that is really, really important. When we think about compliance especially, are we forcing compliance too quickly? In fact, I'm a big believer myself in that we shouldn't be forcing compliance on children. We should be really building that connection first and building that positive relationship. And if we make it to activities that are meaningful and engaging, then it becomes much easier for that child to participate. As well. And that means again planning with that child in mind. So for example, if we know um, thinking of sensory needs, for example, I have a child I work with who likes to put things in their mouth. So I make sure when I'm doing things like Play-Doh or like sand, for example, rather than using real sand, I will use things like crushed up biscuits or crushed crackers. So we're still having that experience, but the child is technically able to eat it without the risk of being harmed, right? Or I know for many of you who work in daycares, I'm sure are already really good at making things like edible Play-Doh and things like that. but making things that are accessible for kids too, right? So they can still participate, but also make sure their needs are being met as well. So, to support behavior, there's some things we need to really be aware of. Number one is behavioral triggers. So triggers, by triggers we mean what are the things that are kind of resulting in that specific behavior. So for example, if it's too noisy, that might be a trigger for a child to become dysregulated, right? And those triggers are going to be different for every single child you work with. And what I will say is, the more you get to know kids, the more you will start to figure out those pieces quickly. And very similar to those behavior cues as well. Thinking about strategies to support communication. So how are we providing strategies to support a child to communicate to us? The more we know kids, the more we can maybe pick up those little things. So for example, some of the kids I work with, I can pick up by their body language that they are becoming dysregulated. Or, for example, one of my kids I work with will start to kind of pace around the room. I can see at that point they're starting to become dysregulated. So then at that point, I can start putting in proactive strategies. Again, and strategies support behavioral responses. So how are we responding? As kind of as educators, we want to be responding in a very predictable way. If we are responding in different ways, then that can sometimes be difficult for many of our kids. And as people, we want to be predictable for our children because often we can be unintentionally some of the most unpredictable things in kids' lives. So, for example, if I let a child do something one time, but the next time I'm shouting at the child, that child is going to be so confused. Well, you let me do it this time, but now you're not letting me do it. I don't know why. So again, being that consistent responses are also really important as well. And that goes as staff being on the same page. So having those discussions as well. Because what we want ideally is whoever that child is going to go to, you kind of know roughly what that response is going to be. Or if not, make sure you're collaborating and communicating as well. So some possible triggers for behavior. So some examples could be transitions. We know many of our kids find transitions difficult, and that is okay. What that means is we might have to really prepare children for transitions. So that might be things like visual timers, first then boards, which we will look at a little bit in some of the examples. Sensory sensitivity. So, for example, if a child is becoming dysregulated because of their sensory needs, that could be a trigger for their behavior as well. And again, social communication deficits or challenges. Um, I'm going to refrain from using that word deficits, but if they're finding it difficult to communicate, of course, that's going to result in a child getting frustrated, right? Again, fear. So it could be fear of how we're going to react. It could be fear about something happening. Again, many of our kids live in a very unpredictable world, right? So that fear is something that is genuine, and we have to really acknowledge that as well. Again, people or environment. If you don't have the right people with our kids, that can be triggering for a child. If a child is getting shouted at, for example, for no reason, or for a reason that they don't understand, how is that going to help them? What I will say is again, the calmer and more patient we can be, the better relationships we're going to have with our kids too. And for example, even in those cases where a child is dysregulated, we want to respond in a really calm way as well, because we want to de-escalate, not escalate situations. And again, medical issues, and also anxiety as well. Many of our kids are extremely anxious. That could be numerous reasons. However, we don't want to add to that anxiety as well. We want to be as predictable and consistent for our kids, as we possibly can be. So anxiety, a really, really important thing to consider. So again, anxiety is a trigger for many behaviors. Children on an autism are more prone to anxiety, and it contributes to dysregulation and challenging behaviors. And again, this is where we might see that escape or de-escalation, which again we really do need to consider that. again, sorry, there's something around, I can't remember the research now, but it was around I think it was the intolerance of uncertainty, right? So for many of our kids, they need to know what's happening. They need to know what's happening next, why something's going to happen as well. And if we're not providing that information, it's going to be hard for that child to interpret why we're doing things the way we are doing things as well. So five kind of prime suspects of anxiety. So number one, cognitive rigidity, and again, I'm not a fan of that specific word, but it's a term they use, and it's difficulties handling change. So we know that our kids find change difficult, so we want to provide a very consistent structure with them. So, for example, when I have kids come to my classroom, they generally know what we do every day. We do the same kind of routine, same structure, and that also helps kids feel safe in their environment as well. And what that also means is, as a teacher, I can leave the room effectively, and my kids can almost leave the session without me being there, because they have a good understanding of the routines and what we do as well. Um, Again, sensory sensitivities. So again, many of our kids have difficulty regulating their sensory input. So for example, sensations that might bother kind of other kids may, which may, sorry, not bother other kids, may um, really bother our children. So for example, it could be things like a tag on a t-shirt. Um, it could be something as small as a pen tapping. I remember one time I was driving in a car with one of my students. This is back in the UK, and one of my students kept jumping out of their seat in the car, and they're like, "What was that?" And I was trying to figure out what that sound was. And after a couple of times, what I realized is I was flicking my coffee mug, like up and down to drink it, and that sound was so distressing for that child. They were almost jumping out of their chair. As soon as I realized that was happening, I kind of said, "So, well, do you want me to not drink, or do you want me to just give you a warning that I'm gonna open my drink?" And he said, "We'll just give you a warning." I was like, "Okay." So I could say to this child, "Hey, I'm gonna open my cup in three, two, one." So he knew that was going to happen. That it was that unexpected sound that, again, my sensory needs just filtered out, but for that child, it felt really loud to them. Again, communication barriers. Um, so again, we know that many of our kids have difficulties communicating, and this demands communicate can also increase frustration, and that's why, again, in early childhood, we really want to focus on communication because again, the more time we have to support our kids to learn these skills, the more chance of success it's going to be. So, for example, in kind of the school I work at right now, we use or we teach kids to use AAC devices in pre-K because we believe it's so important that kids have a lots of opportunity to learn how to use those as well. And also task frustration. So when we think about the task that we're presenting to a child, is it too hard? Can they do it? Is it meaningful for them? Is it interesting? Is it just not engaging? And that can be really important. We want to really, I always use the word getting the pitch right. If we can get that pitch right for a child, it's going to be more meaningful. If we can find a child's interest, for example, think about how we can use that to support learning. So, for example, one of my kids, I mentioned like radio transmitters. So, what we did for one of our lessons is we went around looking for different radio stations and looking to where we got that kind of buzzing kind of sound or that kind of fading sound. Again, another example, we counted radio transmitters. Oh, how many radio transmitters can you see went out? Oh, we can see five. Okay, sweet. So again, making it more meaningful as well. And I appreciate that's hard, that those examples are something harder to do in practice. But for example, if you know a child likes I'm trying to think something really specific like trains, then you can maybe do a lesson on trains, right, and incorporate that into what you're doing. Or for example, if it's a play-based learning activity, have trains outright, have things they're interested in. So some behavioral responses or behavioral is triggered, right? So what does that look like? So that could be anxiety, fear, transition, social communication, people and environment, and these are going to trigger that child. So some of these responses Could, but these are not limited to, could include things like stimming. So stimming is a self-stimulatory behavior. So examples you might see kids who maybe are hand clapping, for example. You might see children pacing. You might see children doing different movements. Some children might do kind of different noises. And that is their way of regulating in the environment. So for example, one child I work with, and when they start to become dysregulated, they start to stim, making a really loud noise. But actually, that's their way of regulating. So, I'm quite fortunate in kind of the work I do. I don't have many kids at one time. So I'm able to, for example, offer other children headphones in that case. I might offer the child a walk if they want to go do something else. As well, but really providing that choice and autonomy as well, as much as what's possible. And again, self-harm. So we might work with children who may engage in self-harming. Again, this is why it's so important. We really want to try and understand the why so we can reduce that as much as possible. Fight, flight, or freeze. So again, different responses. Some children may fight. You might have those kind of kids who you work with who may engage in things like hitting, kicking, those kind of behaviors. And we have to understand why. Because again, if we understand why, we can look at preventing those behaviors as well. No child wants to be in a place where they are hurting others. Often there is a reason for it, and we have to understand why as well. What I will say too is often we don't want to take those things personally, because sometimes it could be the environment in that time. But when children are engaging in those behaviors, just remember it's not personal. And there are times too that sometimes it can be the people they trust the most, where they may engage in those behaviors with as well. But if those things do happen, it's really important to understand that there's a reason for that behavior. And what we don't want to do if we're working with kids who maybe have engaged in behaviors like hitting or kicking, things like that, that we still go in with a really positive mindset, because again, we want to repair that trust with that child as well. If we come in and a child sees that as an adult, we're kind of fearful of that child, all that's going to do is that child is going to pick up on that, and ultimately that's not going to help repair that relationship as well. Um, Again, meltdowns as well. So remember, to a meltdown, a child is not in control of that. So that might be where they engage in specific behaviors. However, in those times, a child has no control over that. And a meltdown is an over response to a specific situation as well, which we'll look at a little bit more as we go through the presentation. So we're going to watch just a quick video just from the National Autistic Society. The National Autistic Society is a really good organisation. They're based in London in the UK, and they do some really amazing things, and they have some really good resources for autistic people. So we're just going to watch a video just about amazing things can happen.
We are all different, and that's wonderful. Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, gender, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't be seen. Our favorite foods, fears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a duck, but some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently. The brain is your body's computer. It works differently for all of us and controls how you learn. That's why we are all good at different things. How you feel, which is why we all feel different emotions. And how you communicate. Sometimes the brain is connected in such a way it affects the senses and how we perceive and read situations and interactions. This is known as autism. Many people have autism, so it's likely you already know someone who is autistic. And for this reason, it's useful to know a little bit about autism. The special wiring inside an autistic brain can sometimes make the person good at tasks we may find difficult, such as mathematics, drawing, or music. It can also do the opposite, and activities we find too easy are incredibly difficult to them, such as making friends. The senses constantly send information to your brain about your surroundings and other people. However, when a person's brain and its senses don't communicate well, the brain can become overwhelmed and confused, affecting how they see the world. Picture yourself walking down the street. This is how an autistic brain may experience the same world. Scary, isn't it? Sadly, in many cases, the person can't say out loud how they feel. So even though there's chaos going on in their heads, they seem okay on the outside, unable to ask for help. We will develop behaviors to help us feel calm in uncomfortable situations. We may look away, hug ourselves, chew our fingernails, fidget, bite our lips, and so on. Equally, autistic people develop behaviors that help them cope with these intense moments. These actions may seem unusual, but they're just their way to feel calm. When they happen, it means they are having a hard time. The kind thing to do is not to give them an even harder time by getting cross, ignoring them, or mocking them. People with autism need friends who are willing to take the time to know them. With good communication and plenty of patience, everyone would be better off. People with autism are not ill or broken. They simply have a unique view of the world. And with a little support from their friends, they might just be able to share that view with us. Autism can make amazing things happen.
Okay, so a nice video there, just thinking about really the message is just how amazing our kids are, right? And it really is a different way of thinking. I don't know if any of you have ever followed some of the work of people like Grant Bruner, who looks at autism from an indigenous worldview. But I highly encourage you to also look at some of that work as well, because especially his work, it really looks at autism in such a positive way as well. So especially if we're thinking about, for example, indigenous cultures, especially, just how much actually that relates so much to newer affirming practices as well. There's some really good things there, right? Even for example, supporting a child who's unable to ask for help. We can often do that. But if a child is unable to do that, it's going to be very hard for them, right? Or even, for example, with one thing we don't want to do if a child is struggling, we don't want to give them a harder time because we have to remember that in many cases, our kids are already struggling to communicate and to get their needs met. So the last thing we want to do is to make their lives harder, right? I know sometimes a strategy that we sometimes see is ignoring, but actually research is telling us more recently that that isn't necessarily the most meaningful approach as well for our kids. So we're going to talk just a little bit about stimming. And what stimming is, it means self-stimulatory behavior. So that is really a way of a child coping in their environment. So one thing I will always say is unless a stim is harming and hurting a child, we should always be allowing that to happen. Because again, why would we take away a skill or why would we take away something that is really helping a child to be them true selves, right? And to be able to regulate in a world that is not designed for autistic people. So we're gonna watch a video just very briefly, just around stimming as well, and just have some examples. I will say I'm not a fan of the words like severe or mild because again it's going to be different for every single child. So even though those words say severe and mild, I just kind of want to say that's not how we should necessarily view stimming. But again, if stimming is a if a stimming behavior is neutral and safe, let it happen, right? That's really important. So I'm just gonna show this video just briefly.
I'll be sharing examples of stimming from Ezra, our 7-year-old who has more severe autism, level 3, which means he needs more support, and from Simon, our 3-year-old who has level 1 autism, which means he needs less support. Stimming is a self-regulatory, stimulating, repetitive behavior, and everyone does it. If you're thinking, oh, I've never stimmed before, then ask yourself if you've ever tapped a pen, or swung your leg, or rocked back and forth, or bit your fingernails, or like this. The list can go on and on. And believe me, you've stimmed before. You've done something repetitively with your body that has helped you regulate and deal with whatever situation you are in. Whether it be an emotional situation, like you were nervous for a job interview, or physically you were just in a spot for too long, like at a desk taking a test for hours and you just needed to stand up and stretch. So imagine you're on a road trip and you've been riding in the car for like 10 hours. Imagine how you would feel. Imagine how your mind would feel, your body would feel. You open the door, you finally get out of that car, and what do? I'm guessing that most people would stretch. You might even kind of go for a run, go for a walk. You would want to move your body to help you regulate the experience that you've been having for the past 10 hours being cramped in a car. If someone told me in that moment that I needed to stop and I needed to get back in the car, I wouldn't want to listen to them, especially if their reasoning was something like, that's not normal. I would look at them and be like, it's normal for me. So here's 12 autistic stims that my 2 boys do. Simon will often stim to help regulate his emotions. When he gets really sad or upset about something, he will run to me, sit in my lap, and take my hair. He will twirl it in his hands, he'll play with it, he'll put it on his face. This is actually a scene from church. It's hard for him to sit still for an entire hour, but it does help when mommy's hair is around. Ezra really...
Okay. I'm gonna stop that video there just because it's about 8 minutes long and I'm cautious of time. But if anyone does want to watch that whole video, definitely send myself or ask me an email. We can send the slides and stuff to you as well. Just a quick video too, and we're going just a little bit on videos now. So again, if you find you need a bit of time to stretch and things like that, please do. But this is just a quick video. It's only about 2 minutes long, around meltdowns. And what I like specifically about this video and the reason why I wanted to show you it is because it is coming from autistic people. So I think the more we can listen to autistic voices, the more meaningful it's going to make our practice too. So we're going to watch this video. It's about 2 minutes long. And again, it's just that kind of idea that a meltdown is not a temper tantrum, and we need to be able to understand, we need to be able to differentiate between the two. Because again, if it's a temper tantrum, typically a child will stop when they get that need met, right? Where the meltdown is completely different as well. So we're going to watch this just for about 2 minutes. So I'm just going to quickly make this a little bit bigger just so you can see it. So
do you have meltdowns? And what are they like?
Jack, I think you're on the wrong screen.
They're very bad, very.
thanks, Ashley.
You're welcome.
Try that again. Okay, can everyone see my YouTube screen? Perfect, thank you.
But it happens when you don't know how to handle circumstances that seem very, very difficult.
And what about like smaller things? Because I think like, because for me, I could have a meltdown like every day. and it's everything is heightened. I think that's the word you were looking for.
Yeah, heightened, yeah.
And I just can't cope, and I can't even use my hands, and I'm shaking, and I drop everything, and everything just gets worse and worse and worse, and it's like everything's going in slow motion. That for me is a meltdown. Do you like get things like that?
Yeah.
Usually for me, it's like I'm seeing red. You know, everything's, I call it the red mist. But at the same time, it's almost like you want to crawl up on the floor and just scream. Afterwards, it's only afterwards that I realise that everything starts coming down again. I'm like, right, what have I done? But when you're in the moment, it's like I keep saying, 100 miles per hour. You don't realise what you're doing. And then once it's all over and the red mist has gone, you go, oh my God, I'm really sorry.
That's
and you
what
feel
I meant
bad about
like, having your eyes closed.
Yeah.
Like, I think any like situation where I've ended up quite aggressive, when you're younger, it's a tantrum. When you're our age, it's not a tantrum anymore. It's a meltdown. But it's whether or not people around you understand that.
And the thing is, you are not like that person.
Exactly.
But if I guarantee you that if the public sees you in that meltdown, that's it. They class you as a naughty individual. And that's the thing, you're not. But because everything's so stressful, it just builds up, and then you blow up. Like
that judgment can make it worse, right? Like
Exactly.
if you're in public. I mean, like you said, you don't tend to have them in public, but
Yeah.
I imagine when you get home, if you felt a certain way and you feel like people are like seeing that in you, it's probably making it 10 times worse.
It's the build-up, definitely. I think as well, because I'm older now, they don't happen as frequently as they did when I was at school, but when they do happen, they're like bad, because it's the build-up from like a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then it just sort of explodes, and it's horrible.
You can't do anything to make anything better. It's a really terrible thing.
It's like a negative spiral.
Yeah.
Yeah. All I really want is for people not to stare. I know how hard it is. You know, if someone's got a really cute Labrador, I want to stare at their dog. But people are probably sick of having their dog stared at. You know, it's like an uncomfortable feeling.
Fair enough. If you're in a traffic jam and there's an accident, you're going to look. But don't go over to the person and go, oh my God, what's happening? Let's film it.
Don't get involved. Yeah.
Don't get involved. Move on. You know.
You're nodding. You agree? Yeah.
Just sort of, just leave me alone. Sort of do what you need to do. I'll just be over here doing what I'm doing. Just sort of like a blank wall, basically. Like there's a wall between us. Don't come any closer.
Yeah.
Just
It's
sort
not
of,
necessarily making them go to sit the other side of the room. It's
No.
you can sit next to me, but just like pretend you're not here.
just, you know, if you're reading a book, carry on reading your book. Don't put your book down and watch me. Just sort of carry on with your day, and I'll just carry on with mine. So yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah.
You know, there's no harm in trying to help. I guess that's the only way you will find out if it's right or wrong. I personally don't want to push everyone away and go, you know, I don't want you to help me, I don't want you to help me. If somebody comes up and I'm having a meltdown, thank you for trying to help. At least you're thinking about it.
It's trying different things, isn't it?
Okay, so just a quick video there from the National Autistic Society. I'm just gonna share my screen with you. I was going to show another video, but just conscious that I've shown about 3 videos at the same time, I'm going to potentially come back to this at the end if we have time. But this is just a really good video which looks at the sensory needs of autistic people as well. So if we have time, I will go back to it at the end, but just kind of in a little bit conscious of time as well. So what we're going to talk about is just around sensory overload and supporting children's sensory needs as well. So one thing we really want to think about is when we're thinking about supporting children's sensory needs is that we want to create enabling environments that can support our students so their needs are met. So for example, if say you're supporting a student who, for example, is struggling being in their environment, the first thing to look at is the environment themselves, right? So that might be taking a step back and thinking, okay, is there anything in the environment that we can do to support that child? And if so, how can we change that? And the idea is that fix the environment and focus on that before we even look at strategies for that child as well, because we're not creating an environment where that child is able to be their true self, then it's going to be more difficult to support them as well. So let's look at a couple of strategies together as well. And I hope this is what you find most meaningful. If you ever want to talk about strategies, please reach out to me at any point. I can talk about this for hours and hours and hours. And I almost wish we had more time. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is visual support. Visuals are so important. I cannot stress that enough. Visuals provide structure, routine, they improve understanding as well. It helps avoid those unknowns. So, for example, if I'm saying, okay, next we're going to look at a slide around, let's say, burst and boards, right? Um, some of you may have got that, some of you will not retain that, right? So using a visual can be really impactful. And we use visuals everywhere, right? If anyone uses Google Maps, for things like logos, if anyone uses calendars, I know I certainly do, menus, stop signs, right? We use visuals all the time. And this is something which I would always say doesn't just help autistic people, it helps all people and all children as well. And actually, this is a strategy that can be used universally. So, for example, in my classroom, I use this with all. Oh, let's just go back. I use this with all students, not just my autistic students as well. So children with ASD or autism are very strong visual learners. And visual strategies, they are evidence-based and they're proved to be effective and meaningful for our kids too. When I'm asked to support kids, one of the first things I will often say is, does the child have visuals? If so, how are they using them? Are they understanding the visual? So, for example, it goes beyond just giving a first then board. A child has to know what that is, right? And I don't think we go into this in this slide, but we have that kind of visual hierarchy too, right? So we might start with real objects, then we might start to move to more concrete and more abstract. So for example, if you're working with an older student or even an adult, they might benefit from just a word. If it's a child in daycare, they might need objects and references or picture symbols as well. So I say that children who I taught in grade 7 still benefit from visual support in a symbol format as well. So again, it's going to be different depending on the child that we're working with. All I would say is just use visuals that are meaningful for that child. So again, research shows visual support, expressive and receptive language, alleviate anxiety, reduces frustration, and also some of those challenging behaviors too. Visuals are permanent and more permanent than words. So as people, we might say a lot of things, but are we following that through? Visuals really do support, and they also support children to process that information as well. Um, I can give you numerous times where I've used visuals to support my kid, and I've also got to learn something about my child. I remember one time I was using teaching grade 1, and we were trying to get the child to go back to the classroom. They were waiting to go outside, and for some reason they were late, and they were trying to follow their routine, but they was late. And actually, what we did is I just wrote on a whiteboard, recess has finished and it is time to go back to class. And that was actually how I learned that child can read really well, because what I was actually doing, I was asking the EA at the time to run and grab picture symbols for the classroom. And I figured out very quickly actually that child can read really well just by using the symbols. So again, how we do that is going to be different depending on the child, but they really are universal strategies for all kids. So 9 reasons to use visuals. So number 1, visuals are permanent. Number 2, they allow time for processing. They prepare students for transition. So for example, if we know something going up, reinforce that with a visual can be really impactful. Visuals can help kids see what you mean, right? They help all students. They build independence too. So, for example, I spoke a little bit earlier just about labeling and things like that. If you can label things, it helps build that child's independence. Oh, okay. Where is the Lego? Okay, go find the picture of the Lego. Again, they're transferable between environments and people. They have no attitude, no tone, frustration. So if you have children who are really cognizant of tone of voice, visuals are consistent and they consistently say the same thing. And again, it helps reduce anxiety too because it helps kids know what to expect and know what the expectations are as well. So I'm going to go into just a couple of examples of visuals. Again, there are so many different ways you can use this. Some of them are my examples, some are different examples. These two examples are things I've used in my own classroom, which I created. So the first one is things that may help me when I'm upset. So number one, talking to adults, listening to music. So they're just different strategies to support. Again, a child can go through, pick different strategies and choose which one they think. Again, you provide choice because, for example, if I tell a child to listen to music, what if that child hates music, right? Or dim the lights, what if the child doesn't like that, right? To provide choice as well. The one on the right is an example to support a child from waiting. So you can't see this on the picture, but when we did this, we had an arrow and it was for a child who was really conscious of waiting for that next thing. So that might be waiting for play, it could be waiting for home, and they want to know almost when that's going to happen, right? So not time, almost time, now. Okay. I will say I created that, but I think I got that idea of somebody else. So I can't take credit for that. Here are just some other examples. So here are just some examples of lessons. So here's a story of chocolate mousse for greedy goose. In this lesson, this was with grade one, we had kind of the sensory kind of it was more like a sensory story in that sense where we had different representations of the stories. We had the chocolate mousse, we had the carrots. Kids would go in, they would smell it, they could touch it, they could experience it, they could taste it as well. Another example of where spots, again, we have a communication board to help kids understand what's happening. So, for example, as I was going through the story, kids could use that communication board to describe what was happening. So, like, Spot is in the box, or the alligator is or like on the stairs, for example, right? And then just the one on the right is just pictures of sorting as well. So there's many different ways you can use visuals. Just some more examples. So these are examples of my current students that I teach. Right now we're doing a lesson on Toy Story. So we have that same structure. Number one, watch Toy Story. Number two, story on TV. Number three, work. Number four, movement break. And the kids I teach will go up there every lesson and touch the symbol so they know what to expect. And actually that can really help me. So for example, if a child wants to do something else, I can go back to that visual, but oh, actually we're on number two. We're waiting for number three, or number three is next, right? And then again, movement break, and give different options too, right? So one of my students who last year was non-speaking, will now go up, touch the movement break communication board, and they'll say wiggle for wiggle dance, right? So it's again, I'm not expecting a child to speak, but it's about giving them choice and really communicating what they need to do, right, as well. So when we did this, for example, I knew that we chose videos intentionally that I know kids would like. Again, we can change those, we can change those options all the time. It's quite easy to do. Again, just some other examples. This is kind of supported transitions as well, and knowing when something's going to start, something's going to finish. So the one on the left is some autism level up. So this is just run, to do, finish, right? You would put the symbol from to do into the finish so kids know what to expect. And the one on the right, very similar. It's just a schedule for a pushing. So in this lesson, what we did zones of regulation, emotions bingo, video, and all done. And they would just take the symbol, take it off, and put it in the finish piece too. Other examples, here are just some examples of, again, a Toy Story story and a Mr. Bean story. So this was, again, really focusing on encouraging communication, really using that visual support there as well. And what kids would do, from the work task piece, what I would give them is I would give them kind of a blank script. So I'd have the picture and then they would then put the symbols in the correct places as well. Again, and for my kids, they found it more meaningful. They was engaging in it. And again, purposely, I use things like Toy Story and Mr. Bean because that's things my kids were interested in, which is why we did it. So here's just an example. Here's just a resource from the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center if anyone is interested in more information about visuals. So here are just some strategies to support anxiety. So again, we have visuals, social stories, some breathing techniques, and how we do breathing techniques. For example, here's an example: blow out the candle, smell the flower, for example, right? You can also have more like tactile breathing things. So with my kids, we have kind of a board. I think it was from we bought it from Amazon, and kids can go through and kind of practice those deep breaths as well. Again, a safe space is really important. If you have the option to in your building, I highly encourage supporting safe spaces. So that could be, for example, a sensory tent in the room. It could be a space in the building. Again, depending on the kids you're working with, you also want to make sure they're safe. And make sure you have things available too, right? That could be things like headphones, it could be fidgets, for example, as needed, or focus tools, and so having those things available. When it comes to safe spaces, you want to make sure that it's actually a safe space for that child. So, for example, we might be like, oh, here's a safe space, but actually, is that a safe space for that child? So, for example, I created I had a sensory tent in my room, and for one of my students, that what they actually found with the safe space was under my desk, and I was like, okay, well, that's where you feel most safe, and that's where you can go. That's fine, because I can have a sensory tent in my room, but if that child doesn't feel safe in that space, then it is not really a safe space, right? So here's just a very quick example of a social story. So this was, and I apologize, I think it's quite blurry on the screen. Here's just an example about fire drills. So sometimes my school has fire drills. It helps teachers be safe. A loud alarm will go off. When I hear the alarm, I need to walk home. So it's just telling me what I need to do in that situation. I need to wait for my teacher. If it's too loud, I can use headphones and things like that. I would try my best to stay calm. Try my best, right? Because again, it's going to be hard for many kids, especially if that's an unexpected sound. And once it's ended, it will stop. I can wait for instructions to go back inside. And then I can go back in class. Fire alarms are very difficult because they're disruptive. We don't know when they're happening. And that can be very difficult for our kids. And again, there's many things, right? Many changes, things that are unexpected crop up as well throughout our day. So having that preparation is really key. So just some other pieces as well around strategies to support transitions. And so we have things like visual schedules, first then boards, visual timers, video modeling as well is really important. I have some examples which I will show you as well. And it also just helps provide that structure, routine, and predictability. So again, I know I've said this quite a few times, but hopefully I'm reinforcing it. That predictable, consistent structure is so important for our kids because again, it helps our kids feel safe in their environment. It also helps them anticipate when a transition is going to happen as well, and also communicate changes and keep things consistent. So here are just some examples. So you have things like first then boards, you have things like visual timers. I know, I'm sure for many of you who are in daycares, you probably use these things all the time. So things like, again, first writing, then choosing, or first you do this, until you do these things, then you can have choosing, right? And for many of my kids, I don't know if you have this too with the kids you support, the visual timers can be really helpful. So I think about one of the kids I work with, we always use timers. So in 3 minutes is time for recess. And one of my kids who I work with right now, they kind of just started to understand that some are longer than others. So for example, if I say, okay, we're going to use the yellow timer, they say, no, Mr. Jack, I want to use the red one. I'm like, okay, that's a little bit shorter though, because they've started to get that concept of time, right? And again, the nice thing about visual timers is kids can see exactly when that next thing is going to happen as well. So some other strategies to support sensory challenges. So again, we want to minimize triggering sensory stimulation, provide things like noise cancelling headphones. I again teaching in the K to 12 system. I have about 50 noise cancelling headphones or earphones in my classroom. Where at the end of the year, I have one left in my room. So I guess what that means is so many kids are using them, and that's not just children with autism, that's actually many kids throughout our school, neurodivergent and kids who also are neurotypical as well. Again, reduce clutter, soft lighting, sunglasses, right? If kids need that, let them use it because it helps them with the regulation. Provide sensory breaks in a safe space. Heavy work, so that could be things like bouncing a ball, jumping on the trampoline. It could be things like taking a walk. Think about different activities that that child is going to engage in as well. Again, and social narratives to help prepare for different sensory occurrences as well. So here are just some examples from task completion strategy. So here, for example, is visual schedules and the step-by-step procedure. So again, it helps guide students know what to expect and when it's going to happen. Adapt and modify tasks, chunking, providing breaks too. So here's an example of let's get ready to go play out in the snow, right? So they need, it goes through kind of the steps they need there, right? And the things they need to get ready for that. Here's just an example of video modeling. So video modeling is a strategy that we would use to teach children skills through video. In a real life context, I would love to use videos with my students, but just because of keeping my kids safe, it's me, but I'll just show you just a quick example. This was supporting one of my kids to learn how to request for, I believe it's bubbles.
I want bubbles. I want bubbles.
Let's see if there's a bit of a delay, but there's the bubble. And then the other video is that same, pretty much the same video. It's just from a slightly different angle. So in this case, we're showing the student where the buttons are, right? So
I want bubbles.
I want bubbles, and then the bubbles then come, right? So again, just some different examples to show kids how to do things, right? Again, in a real life context, if you can do that with a peer, that's likely going to be more meaningful than, for example, me doing it. But again, if you're supporting a child using AAC, for example, it's going to take them time to learn that. For me, that took me a few seconds to figure out where the buttons are. So just imagine how that's going to be for our kids who are learning it for the first time as well. So just some other examples, visual supports for independence. So things like getting your things ready, using the washroom, for example. So this is an example I did with some pre-K students, just going through those steps, right, to know what to do. And this specific visual is about building independence in the classroom. Again, communication barriers. So thinking about things when we think about communication barriers, many of our kids have significant difficulty communicating and expressing their ideas. So we really want to support them in a way that is meaningful. So, for example, it could be visual support using choice boards, right? Giving kids, again, autonomy is really important. Make sure we're giving choices that are meaningful. Also, if we get using choice boards, we want it to be realistic and meaningful for that child. So, for example, if we give 10 choices, that's probably going to be overwhelming for that child. So I would often kind of give 2 or 3 choices and gradually build on that over time. Again, depending on the child you're working with, because every child is slightly different there too. AAC, so augmentative and alternative communication. So if any of you work with AAC users, the example I just showed you actually, that was me modeling AAC. But what that is it's an alternative way to communicate, right? So an example here is an iPad. There are other things too. It could be through visual supports, more low tech, things like PECs. It could be other things as well. Again, reduce language when the child is distressed. So I think I'm going to skip through that slide. So when a behavior occurs, so we just want to think about identify the reason, the purpose, the triggers, respond appropriately, and those underlying needs. And again, most importantly, just protecting the dignity of that child. We have to remember the child is a child, and we have to respect that too. I always say, imagine if that was your child and how you're responding. As a parent, is that something that you would be happy with? And if the answer is no, then we have to change our approach as well. That dignity is so important. So, for example, if you have to support kids who are changing, for example, how are we doing that in a way that is showing dignity for that child and in a respectful way as well. So again, just some other things, watch for those cues. Recognize when a child is dysregulated. Really think about implementing those strategies to accommodate and de-escalate, right? The calmer you can be in those situations, the more it's going to help that child. So for example, if I come in and I'm heightened myself, then maybe I'm not the right person in that moment to support that child because that's not what that child needs in that moment. Again, support them, model communication. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling angry. I need help. Model that language and also model without expectation, right? So we're modeling to a child, but I'm not, for example, going to force a child to use their words, but I'm going to keep modeling and modeling and modeling in the hope that eventually they'll be able to do that, but they may not too, and that is okay. Again, support anxiety, visual schedules, task analysis, so breaking those things down into small steps. And just remember behaviors, communication, there's always a reason, and we want to be proactive. It's much easier to be proactive than what it is to react to a behavior. And I'm saying that as somebody who's often dealing or supporting kids when they're at that dysregulated point, it is much easier to support them before they get to that point. So again, a good autistic life is having the right to live a good life in dignity in an inclusive, safe, and supportive environment. And again, just recapping, proactive strategies, prep the environment to create a meaningful, create a safe environment for that child. Think about things that are safe. So for example, if you might have a child who put things in their mouth, having really small objects on hand may not be a good idea. Think about when and when you put them out. Think about your space, reduce your language. If I'm using so many words to a child, that might be overwhelming. Again, provide a safe space, which is safe for that child, not safe for us. Set up with personalized supports. Again, it's going to be different for every child we work with. That is okay, right? I wouldn't expect the same strategies to work for one child as what I would with another. Again, know the student's triggers, prepare for transitions, have those visual supports ready and have them on hand. What I will say is better to have them and not need them because than to need them and not have them. Because if you're in a situation where you need visuals and you don't have them, that can be extremely stressful for both the child and for yourself as well. And then lastly, just a few things, proactive strategies. So think about focusing on those positive relationships. Connection is so important. The more we want to have a connection with the child, the more meaningful it's going to be for everybody. And again, that takes time. We're not going to get that straight away, and that's okay. Build connections not only with the child, with the family too. Figure out their interests, their likes, their dislikes, and really use that to support our kids. Listen to what our kids are telling us, right? If they're able to, that's great. If they're not, though, we have to be even more detectives and try and figure out what that child is communicating to us. And again, I appreciate that it's not easy to do. Use interest to build connections. So, for example, if a child is interested in radio transmitters, try and learn about radio transmitters, or even if it's something really small. Or, for example, I had a child who loved Ariana Grande, so I would try and learn some Ariana Grande songs just as a way to connect with that child as well. Could I tell you every single word of the song? Definitely not. But could I tell you her top hits now? Yeah, I think so. Um, Again, visual supports, consider the environment, and just making sure we're keeping our kids so we feel safe. So I'm not going to do that slide just because being of time, but just to finish, one of the worst enemies of autistic people is other people's social expectations. So this comes from Pete Mornaby. He's a autistic author, and I think again, the more we can listen to autistic voices, the more meaningful it is going to be. So thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you listening. I skipped through a few slides. I put more in just in case I needed to fill the time, but it actually went really quickly. So thank you so much, everyone. If anyone has any questions as well, feel free to type them in the chat.
Thank you so much, Jack. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the chat here just in case we have a couple questions flooding in. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and all your insights today during this PD session. I have the pleasure of working with Jack in a couple different capacities. So not only is he instructing for our autism certificate program, but he's also doing some research for us to better support our major curriculum revision that's going to be happening next year. So it was just incredibly valuable, Jack. This was wonderful. I'm going to put a couple links in the chat here. If everybody, okay, first of all, I will put in a link to the Autism Spectrum Disorder Certificate of Achievement because Jack is one of our wonderful instructors. And so if you'd like to learn more about this, definitely consider maybe taking a course or two through SAS Polytech. And then secondly, I'm going to put a link in here to a Microsoft form. So I'm hopeful that I can generate a report of attendance here, but just in case something goes glitchy, if people wouldn't mind filling out the form, that way we can ensure everybody receives a certificate of participation for today. And Jack, if you're willing to share your slides, I can definitely email that to people as well. So
Absolutely.
perfect. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to unmute yourself or just drop a question in the chat. Yeah. Got lots of good feedback here, Jack. Lots of thank yous.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, we would love to share the slides. Yes, just fill out the Microsoft form just to make sure we have the correct email address for everybody.
I appreciate you asking questions on Zoom is sometimes quite difficult as well. So I say this to my own students too. If anyone does have any specific questions, like you're more than welcome to reach out to Ashley or myself too, and we're happy to answer them as well. I know there's a lot of people here, so again, feel free to unmute yourself, but please don't feel pressure either, just as I wouldn't with my own kids, right, who I support.
So we are very hopeful that this recording has worked. And then I will download it and I would have our admin assistant, Norma Jean, who probably set up the Zoom link for you, will have her send it out as well. And again, if you are able to fill out the Microsoft form, we'll make sure we have the correct email addresses to send the recording to as well. So you should be able to, hopefully you would receive the recording, Jack's presentation, and the certificate for participation as well. Perfect. Thank you guys so much for taking a moment and filling that out for us. And feel free to leave any comments and feedback for us as well.
Absolutely. And be as honest as you can be. I know as an instructor, we genuinely want honest feedback too, because that's how we make things better, right?
Thank you. This is wonderful. That's all I'll say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Once you fill out the form, you're welcome to jump off the call unless you have a question or anything. But like Jack said, just reach out anytime. Oh, we have 29 responses already. This is wonderful. Awesome. Great. There's still a few handful of people still here. Hopefully the links are working. Okay, I'll put the link back in again and we'll try again. Yes, you are welcome to leave the meeting once you are all finished.
The link works for me, so hopefully it should. You know.
Okay, the QR code is maybe not working. Just try clicking that link there and see if that'll be better.
The QR code works for me, but I know sometimes like technology works and doesn't work. Hey, so hopefully it should work, or it was just a glitch or something like that.
Could be, yeah. Yeah, the QR code is the same as the link. It'll take you to the exact same survey. So as long as you were able to access one, okay, perfect. Glad it's working. Yes, you can absolutely leave the meeting if you're all finished filling out the form. Have a wonderful night. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
We will send the recording a little bit later, probably tomorrow or by Friday. So please make sure you fill out the form and make sure you leave your email address and we will send the recording.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, we'll maybe stay on for one more minute just in case there's a few people that have just walked away from their computer maybe and are just going to hang out on Zoom for a while. But oh, the link is not working again. I will add it again. One more time here.